Good evening and welcome to Harmony Equine's first webinar. Thanks for all of you that came back after our somewhat rocky start last week and learning about the workings of the computer. But we will go ahead and proceed. We've got a lot of territory to cover tonight, and we'll take questions in the chat thing at the side, and we will answer questions at the end, or they will get answered during the actual talk. So let's go ahead and get started. Lyme has been around for 40 to 50 years. And actually, it may have been around for much longer than that, because they found a 5,300-year-old body in the Alps, kind of frozen and preserved, and that showed that the Lyme bacteria was present back then. Even though a lot of people and countries say they don't have it, it's actually found all over the world, USA, or Europe, and Asia. Some areas more commonly than others. The East Coast of the United States seems to have the most cases, where I live in Virginia, all the way up into the northern states in New England. But you can have it anywhere, and it also can be, as we're going to talk later, dormant in the body until something happens 2 or 3 or 4 years after the initial infection. So you could purchase a horse and 2 years later find out that you have Lyme, and that horse you may not be in an area where there's a lot of Lyme, but that horse may have come from an area where there was a lot. So the Lyme bug is a spirochete called Borrelia burgdorferi, one of these incredibly complex corkscrew-shaped bacteria. And we'll find out a little bit more about why that makes it so difficult to work with, because it's actually a very, very smart beast. It is related to, and it looks like and behaves like, the syphilis bacteria. And syphilis was a disease that's much less common now, but plagued the populations of people ago. People tend to think that it's transmitted only by ticks, but there is also evidence that we could have fleas, spiders, mosquitoes, mites. We probably don't know all the ways of transmission at this point in time. There are hosts than just deer, and people talk about, particularly in the US, the deer tick, and that certainly is a major route of transmission. But the deer tick really requires the white-footed mouse, and those guys live everywhere. But it also can have a reservoir in chipmunks, which we all like, so we don't tend to want to blame them, hedgehogs, rats, humans, dogs, horses, and other. Rats seem to be much less prone to it, but they do get it. In areas where Lyme is prevalent, 25% of the unfed nymphs, and the nymphs are much smaller than the adult ticks. So if you think finding some of these adult ticks can be difficult, the nymphs can be literally the size of a head of pin or even smaller. The spirochete can exist in 50% of the adult ticks. The problem with this particular bug is that it can adapt to the host, it can adapt to drugs, and cleverer than we are in many, many cases. So it has this outer protein coat called decorin, and that hides the spirochete from the host's immune system. So basically, the tick bites, or the human, or the dog, and the spirochete is already adapting to your personal immune system before it leaves the body of the tick. Slide into your bloodstream and bypass the immune system. And then it continues to change. Really important when we look at how we're going to treat it, because it can avoid the immune system, it can avoid drugs, it can avoid herbs, it can avoid all different kinds of compounds that we put in. So we have to stay a step ahead of it and be smarter than it is. Other bacteria, and this is actually something that's common in many resistant bacteria. I don't know exactly how it communicates, but it does. It also travels fastest in collagen, not in blood. So collagen is the connective tissue that connects everything to everything. If you think about the thin membrane that you'll see if you eat a chicken leg, that thin membrane is called fascia, and the fascia covers everything from the tip of the head to the tip of the tail. That's where the spirochete is happiest, and it travels. So that is one of the reasons why you have pain throughout the entire body, or the pain can show up anywhere, because this spirochete does not require blood. So it also goes happily to joints, tendons, ligaments, into the skin itself, into the inside of the eye, the aqueous humor. And there are actually cases that have now been documented that show uveitis in horses can actually have Lyme in it. The meninges, which is the covering of the spine, and we definitely see neurologic issues with these horses, and it can go to the heart. So the heart is a big piece of Lyme. In the equine, it probably is not. We certainly don't have a lot of overt heart disease, but we really haven't looked for it. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not. We're going to look at this condition from a Chinese medicine perspective. And from a Chinese perspective, the liver acupuncture meridian, in Chinese medicine, these acupuncture pathways or meridians, I look at them like they have a Chinese job and a Western job. So the Chinese job of the liver meridian is to govern the sinews, and sinews is just another word for tendons and ligaments, the collagen, which we were just talking about, tendons, ligaments, joint capsules, and all the things that we talked about. So there's a big component of the liver acupuncture meridian in the treatment of Lyme disease as well. This shape-shifting capability of it allows the spirochete to enter cells. It can form protective coating, and it can hide completely. It can go dormant. And in many cases, if it goes dormant, that can be okay if your animal is not symptomatic. The antibiotics have been shown to cause some of these abnormal motile forms. Those are some of the ones that can hide. Not that we aren't going to use some antibiotics, most likely in treatment, but we have to be very aware that antibiotics can contribute to issues. And especially when you use the same antibiotic over a long period of time. There's 3 main forms in the shape shifting, and there's many, many more. You can spend an entire evening lecture just on what the spirochete is capable of. So it has the active spirochete form that goes into the body from the tick and is the active form that is usually causing the infection. Then it can go into this next stage of a spiroblastic L form, guarding its cell wall and some of those proteins. And then it can go into the cyst form, which becomes dormant. And the key is it's dormant until the terrain is right. And by terrain, I mean the animal's immune system. So this is where stress comes into play, and we'll talk about that a lot later on. But the cyst form is just sitting there waiting to do something. And it's waiting for an opportunity. It's not just being quiet. This bug doesn't just like to go sit there and be quiet. It's waiting to come back and be active. These outer surface proteins, or OSPs, become important partly because we see them on our lab tests and partly in a more understanding of what's happening with the bug. So the OSPs, or outer surface proteins, live on the outside of the bug. And they can show up as changes on the surface. And they can change again. They change as while the spirochete is in the tick. They change again after they get into the body of the warm-blooded host, the dogs, horses, and humans. What I will talk about the lab tests in a little bit. The OSPA that you'll see on the test is present on the bug when it's inside the gut of the tick. So as the tick is feeding on the horse, the bacteria is leaving the tick's gut, and it changes to this OSP on its OSPC on its surface. So then you generally will look at the OSPC as a sign of early infection. Then a few weeks later, when it becomes more chronic, you see the OSPF. The reality is that the OSPs do not necessarily follow what we see clinically in the horse. So you can see an OSPA or an OSPC or an OSPF, and this horse might be just acutely sick. Technically, it should all be A, but you might see quite a lot of F. Now, was that F there because the horse actually had low-grade Lyme that you hadn't recognized? Or was that OSPF also activated by the current infection? So these tests are not perfect, but they do get us in the ballpark. We have, in this shape-shifting capability of it, we have these blebs, which are just partial pieces that are set out to confuse the immune system. And what they're doing is trying to divert the energy of the immune system and wear it out and keep it busy, so it's not going to bother with the spirochete. So as this spirochete enters the body, the natural killer cells are part of our immune system. The immune system is very complex, so this is very simplified. And it looks like my slides are not advancing. Can everybody hear me okay? The immune system is, these natural killer cells are what is suppressed in many cases by the Lyme bug. And we will work on why my slideshow is not working properly. Also have some, at the end of this, everybody can get a copy of the slides. We'll send out a PDF file to anybody who wants it, since the slides don't seem to be doing what we would like them to do. No matter how much testing you do, things are not always perfect. So part of this immune system evasion is why it's very difficult to, it's difficult for the body to respond to it, and it's also difficult to diagnose it with blood tests, because the immune system is actively being attacked or trying to make, the Lyme bug is trying to make the immune system not work so well. So we come along 6 months or a year into an infection, and all of a sudden, the immune system is low, but we finally decided to take a blood test, we don't necessarily see numbers when we take that test. So our OSPFs and our OSPCs and all of that may not show a very strong infection, and yet clinically the animal looks like it is not, clinically it looks sick, look like it's very sick. Those horses to me are a little bit harder to treat because we have to work harder to improve the immune system. As the spirochete is invading it's hiding, and the immune system actually ends up not working nearly as well as it did. So as it's avoiding the immune system, the spirochete is moving from the bloodstream into the body fluids. So it can move in and out of cells, it can move in and out of tissue, and as it moves inside some of the tissue, it actually becomes invisible to the antibodies and killer T cells, which are the parts of the immune system that are trying to attract it. What's called the blood-brain barrier. And the blood-brain barrier there's not many things that will cross it. And that means that it can enter the spinal cord and you can actually see your neurologic symptoms. And a lot of our drugs don't cross the blood-brain barrier very well either. Many of the herbs will, and some of the homeopathics also. So when we come to symptoms, we do not necessarily see the classic bullseye that is talked about in human medicine. Part of that bullseye, and the bullseye is sort of a red-centered area where the tick is actually bitten, with a white area and then another red area, which is what gives it more of a bullseye appearance rather than just a red bump. But on the animals, we really have a lot of hair that gets in the way. By itself, even though a lot of people will say, well, if you don't have a bullseye, you don't have Lyme, the bullseye is, according to different reports, some of it is either 10% or 20%. Most reports don't go any higher than 25% of the cases of Lyme where people have seen an actual bullseye. We can have a shifting lameness. In Chinese medicine, we come back to the name of a wind invasion because the lameness shifts. And a lot of times you'll see a lameness in maybe the right front, and then you see a lameness in the right hind, and you call the vet out, and the vet says, well, actually, I think it's lame in the left front. And that is, in Chinese medicine, a classic wind invasion. And as we understand it from a Chinese medicine perspective, then we know what herbs we might want to treat it with or what acupuncture. We can see reduced neurologic function. It can go into the central nervous system or to the spine. Some of those cases look like or are called EPM. Some of the cases are just considered to be chiropractic issues. Some cases may be thought of as other neurologic diseases. EPM is the most common one in the US and get confused with it. And in some cases, you can actually have EPM and Lyme together. The mental symptoms are one of the big things that set Lyme apart from just a lameness. Because if a horse is lame, they may limp, they may, if both their front feet hurt, they may not particularly want to jump or do some kind of high impact sport. Okay, as long as you're not asking them to do something that hurts. and their personality is normal and all of that. With Lyme, you generally have lethargy and fatigue even when they're fit, or you'll find your horse is not wanting to perform. They start to hate to work, they get stubborn, they get dull. And that is sort of the classic picture of Lyme, that there's this I don't like life sort of attitude. Other side of Lyme can go the opposite direction. And in my particular area, I would say around the horses become spooky or flighty. And this actually can be dangerous. I've had very quiet horses go to being completely unrideable, even by a professional. Once we get them treated, they go back to being their well-behaved self. I do have one area of the horses that get Lyme are spooky, and it's just one area in one county. But there are, in the human research, there's like 300 different strains of this Borrelia burgdorferi spirochete. So I think that we can see quite a few different manifestations of it. So just because they aren't lethargic doesn't mean that they don't have Lyme. People talk a lot about memory deficits and brain fog. And it's possible that some of the brain fog in the horse translates into some of this spookiness because they don't understand it. And they are flight animals, and they really do. That's how they escape. That's how they sort of take care of themselves. People also have a lot of difficulty with motor skills and problem solving. So there's some real mental aspects to it. Musculoskeletal system symptoms, the arthritis signs, and arthritis is a general term that means inflammation of joints. The arthritis signs can come and go, and interestingly enough, they often come and go with the moon. So there are people who very definitely see an aggravation around the time of the full moon, month after month, of the symptoms. The musculoskeletal symptoms can also vary with the quality of the immune system and the amount of stress. We're going to talk quite a bit about stress because that is a key component in treating this. The amount of spirochete levels relevant to the symptoms, and there are certainly some blood tests that people are trying to do to measure spirochetes in the bloodstream and all kinds of other ways of finding these. But in many cases, the levels really aren't the key. It's the amount of symptoms the horse is saying that's really the most important thing. We can spend an awful lot of money sometimes on diagnostics with x-rays, ultrasound, scintigraphy, all kinds of things like that, because the symptoms are not specific. So the horse is a bit lame. So you work them up, you do a lameness exam, you inject a joint, you do some x-rays, you see that there's no bone spurs, so you think that things should go better. Ways that I often back into it is that you end up with poor results from your treatment, and that can be conventional treatment or alternative medicine. If I come in and I acupuncture a horse a little bit better, and I expect them to be a lot better, then I'm going to suspect, because many of those horses, they need more than just an acupuncture treatment to get them feeling better. So when we come to diagnosing it, to me, the history is one of the most important aspects of the diagnosis, because I want to know how the horse is feeling along with the physical, maybe hock issues, maybe a little bit of foot pain. And I want to know what other therapies have been done, because I want to know how well, what the results were. If you inject the hock and the horse is perfectly fine, then the main issue was probably the hock. In the diagnostic part, we have the laboratory testing, which is helpful, but definitely not conclusive. That lower the immune system function in an individual horse means a lower antibody response. Measuring with these lab tests is not the spirochete. It's the response of the body to the spirochete. So if you have a poor immune system, then the spirochete immune system, the antibodies are not going to build up, and so your test is going to come out low. I have many horses that I feel very strongly have Lyme disease, and we treat them for Lyme disease, and their tests are still on the low side. In humans, a lot of times you're 2, sometimes even 3 years into recovery before your tests will come back positive because you just don't have enough immune system. And even in the human world where we have some more detailed testing, that is still not a definitive test for Lyme disease that we can always hang our hat on. Once the immune system heals, a higher titer at times, the titer being the measure of the antibodies. I'm going to want to look at the horse and the test together, because if the horse is doing great, but the titer is still high, I'm not unhappy. I'm still going to support that horse, but that means that now my immune system, or his immune system, is strong enough to overpower the Lyme, and it's doing its job. So I'm not going to keep treating until I see that immune system response go down, or the titer response go down to really, really low. I want to look at the horse. If the horse is telling me he's feeling great, it's back to working, performance is good, then I might once a year take a Lyme test. You can make yourself crazy doing a Lyme test every few months to see if it's going down. And if you continue to treat with things like antibiotics, then with a more and more suppressed immune system, which is not what we want. So our main test in the United States is the Cornell test called a multiplex test, and it's measuring those OSP, A, C, and Fs, and it's generally more accurate. We also have a SNAP test, which is a test that's done usually at the side of the horse, and it reads the surface antigens and give you both false positives and false negatives. It can be useful, but if you really want to spend your money in a place where best spent is really looking at a good lab test and sending it to the Cornell test. If you just want a quick scan or you're just rechecking, you can certainly do the SNAP test, but you don't have numbers to really compare things to, and you don't have a way to get a good trend. So now, from a holistic perspective, what we want to do is to take into account the whole horse. We're not just looking for the lame leg. We're looking for what really is the picture that presents us so that we can decide how to treat it. The beauty and the curse of holistic medicine is that every horse is an individual. There are certainly characteristics of this disease that apply across the board. But each horse is still an individual, and some horses need a lot of help and some horses only need a little bit of help. The longer the horses have been on antibiotics, and I see horses sometimes that have been on antibiotics for 6 months, when those guys are, when their immune system has been suppressed for that long a period of time, we have a lot of repair to do to the immune system before we are actually going to make a long-term change. If you're working with a homeopathic vet, and I do telephone consults with people to help guide you through the possible treatments for this. With a homeopathic approach, the main thing is the history. You put together any lab work and any other diagnostics you have, but the history and the details are very, very important. We need to change what we're doing on a frequent basis. That means antibiotics. Don't keep doing the same thing for more than 30 days. Sometimes some herbal approaches I will use, I change the herbs every couple of weeks. Other times, month, if a horse is doing fabulously on one formula, we might go for a couple of months. But I'm not going to put that horse on the same herb for a long period of time because the spirochete's going to adapt to it. A big thing to talk about, we talked a little bit about stress, issue of vaccination, which will be a topic for another webinar. But vaccination, when you give a vaccine, what you're asking the body to do, you're putting a shot of immune stimulant into the body, but the body has to respond to it. During that response time, the immune system actually is suppressed. So what ends up happening is that when the immune system goes down for a few weeks, that's when that spirochete comes out of the cells and into action. So we talked about the liver acupuncture meridian being one of the most important meridians from an acupuncture standpoint. Well, the season of the liver is the spring in Chinese medicine. And so if the liver is a little bit weak, you're actually going to have more symptoms in the spring. That's usually when we do a lot of our vaccinations. Also have all the ticks have woken up from the winter. So we are hitting that horse's immune system from all sides when vaccinate in the spring. It's much more effective to do some titers and really think about what vaccines you actually can use, should use in a particular horse. And we'll cover that whole thought with another one of these webinars, because I think they're kind of a fun thing to do when we have all the software working. So the Lyme vaccine, we have to touch on that topic for a little bit. The vaccine is going to affect the immune system function just like any other vaccine. We don't have one that's approved for horses. We have vaccines technically are for the OSPA antigen, which is that early antigen. But most of the time, we don't want to vaccinate a horse or any animal if they already have the disease. Is in your neighborhood, say, or in your barn, you often don't vaccinate all the horses that have been exposed. You try to treat them, isolate the other horses, but you don't vaccinate them right at that moment because that immune system is going to go down before it comes up. So many of these horses actually do have Lyme disease. So if you're going to use a vaccine, you probably want to check, at least make an attempt to check for the presence of Lyme disease before you give the vaccine. There's, at Tufts University on dogs shows and quotes, there is no known benefit of vaccination after an initial exposure to the Lyme-causing bacteria. So in other words, once the immune system has already been exposed to the spirochete, they're saying there's no benefit to vaccination. So I think it's hard to know whether many of these horses have been exposed. Certainly a lot of food for thought. Now comes the part that you really want. You had to suffer through all of the science so you can kind of understand what we're trying to do when we're treating. Unfortunately, the magic bullet does not exist. I want a magic bullet just as much as everybody else does. So, since it doesn't exist, what we want to do is use the best of everything, keeping in the back of our mind that the most important thing is the animal's own immune system. So, if I'm seeing a case early on, I'm going to antibiotics, and I will probiotics, and we're going to talk in more detail about what to do. The good human Lyme doctors use a lot of antibiotics as well, along with all the other supportive therapy. The thing, if you're going to use antibiotics, is to be aggressive about it and not use a low dose. Use the full dose. Go for probably 30 days. I don't tend to go a lot longer than 30 days on one antibiotic. Have many antibiotics to choose from. In the horse world, we basically have 3, and they're all in the same family. That some horses respond a little bit better to doxycycline, some respond a little bit better to minocycline, and some to the intravenous oxytetracycline. And the intravenous can be difficult in some management situations, some barns that can be more problematic. But it can be a very, very effective way of using antibiotics. Again, aggressively, and then you can be done with them. The real key then behind all of this is to support and strengthen the immune system. So with antibiotics, if I'm using, say, the IV antibiotics, there's so many different protocols out there, and I work with a lot of other veterinarians on clients' horses, and I'm totally flexible because I don't think that we have one perfect antibiotic protocol. So sometimes we do IV antibiotics for 7 days and then go back to the oral antibiotics. Sometimes do the IV antibiotics for 2 weeks and then go to oral, or vice versa. Many different possibilities, and you can certainly work with your regular veterinarian on that. The key with antibiotics is that they do actually suppress the immune system. 2/3 of the immune system lines the gut of the horse. So antibiotics kill off the good bacteria and the bad bacteria. Since 2/3 of the immune system is on the gut wall, if the gut wall gets slightly inflamed, which it does when you kill off some of the good bacteria, part of that immune system is not working so well. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of treating. And like I said, every animal's an individual, and just because I've listed some remedies here does not necessarily mean that is exactly what the horse needs. Sometimes it can be very obvious. Sometimes it takes a little bit more reading and research and learning. So homeopathy, to me, is one of the foundations. It's one of the most curative forms of alternative medicine. And mostly treat these guys from a constitutional perspective, which means taking the whole case and deciding which remedy fits the best. There are a few remedies that really do fit many, many Lyme cases. One you may have heard of is called Ledum, and Ledum fits the Lyme cases that are lethargic, grumpy, lamenesses, don't want to go to work, and maybe some mental fog or lack of attention. That would be a good Ledum case. Rhododendron, just like the flower, the rhododendron flower, that is one that's good for horses that have more joint pain, stiffness, and soreness. They often get better as they warm up. Kalmia, spelled Kalmia, is another remedy that often fits the horses that are very spooky, as does Arsenicum alb. An Arsenicum alb is made from arsenic, if you understand homeopathy. That'll be a topic for another webinar. But any of those potentially can be the foundation of really healing the horse. I usually give once a day or twice a day for a week. I'll use the 30C potency you can get from the health food stores, the 200Cs and the 1Ms and higher potencies are gotten from homeopathic pharmacies. I apologize for my dog barking in the background. And those, I often use a 200C potency, but if the remedy is the right remedy, it's a little bit less important. So a 30C I might give twice a day, 200C I might give once a day. There are many herbal protocols out in the world. These herbs actually have more results with treating Lyme disease than do the drugs. It can be useful. If I have a horse that has had a lot of drugs, a lot of antibiotics, I'm probably not going to use those at all. I'm just going to repair the immune system, use the homeopathics, and use some of the herbs. So with the Western herbal medicine, there are protocols involving anywhere from 1 to a half a dozen or more herbs. And I keep a few on my website that are useful for treating Lyme disease. Some of these are only sold to practitioners. I use some herbs from Herbalist and Alchemist in the States. I use some herbs from individual herbs sometimes. It's very variable depending on what I see, but there are very good Western protocols that you can use. Chinese herbal medicine is really my foundation along with my homeopathics. For pain, I also can stimulate the immune system with that. But we also have the ability to treat that liver meridian and add in some specific herbs for Lyme disease. When we're treating the liver meridian from a Chinese perspective, we're treating the meridian that's been most damaged by the spirochete. So there's a number of Chinese formulas out there. If you're working with people who have been trained at the Qi Institute, there's a formula called Lyme formula. I use one called Clear Spiro, which is another that some of the veterinarians can get that's not sold so much over the counter. And there are also simple things like Japanese knotweed, Japanese knotweed is a highly invasive herb that is very useful and maybe even useful in helping prevent in areas where Lyme disease is very prevalent. It's not a guarantee that your horse will not get Lyme disease, but you can get some powdered Japanese knotweed and feed about a tablespoon, probably 3/4 of a tablespoon for most horses. And you have some effect against the ticks. What you don't want to do, though, like I said before, we don't want to do the same thing every day. So knotweed, maybe preventatively, when you're really having tick outbreaks, and then try to not use it the rest of the time. Otherwise, its effectiveness will go down. So in Chinese medicine, we also are going to be looking at the horse from a constitutional perspective. And one of the big things that Lyme does is, and you'll hear people talk about it, is the fatigue and the lack of energy is in Chinese medicine, that's called qi deficiency. And so many of these horses will do a spirochete clearing formula and then two of a qi building formula, and qi is really related to the immune system. So if the qi is really down and the horse is really lethargic, you also do not have much of an immune system. And I have some horses that I will actually treat for their qi deficiency first, bother to do something specifically for the Lyme disease. We also get horses that have a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort. So we would be using a formula that's more for pain, is considered stasis of the blood and stagnation of the qi. And so I will use formulas for that. And these are the sorts of things. Chinese formulas are very specific to what we need to do. So these are some of the things that I do to help people figure out what's the best thing for their horse. The most important type of product to use with your horse is probiotics. The good bacteria that are in the gut need to be replenished. And prebiotics, which are that give the probiotics a place to grow. So you'll see some formulas have prebiotics, and I use one I've got on the website called Pre-Pro that has prebiotics and probiotics in one formula. Single probiotic or groups of probiotics. And my favorite ones are ProBi from Advanced Biological Concepts and this Pre-Pro, but there are other good ones out there, and if you have one you're really happy with, you can certainly use that. Means probiotics while you're giving antibiotics, and for a minimum of 2 to 3 months afterwards, after you finish any antibiotics. Probiotics, many of these horses can live on their entire life, though I do tend to change products periodically if I'm using them for a long period of time. And you definitely want high quality products, and you don't need a lot of additives. One of the most commonly used probiotics in this country, if you look at it, it's got all kinds of additives to it, and probably not that much in the way of live probiotics. The next big aspect to treating this is the immune support. We want to strengthen the immune system as much as we can, and really for the life of the horse afterwards. Some of the immune products can be very expensive, and so it's important to be as targeted as you can. Have a large pocketbook, in which case you can use, you're not going to hurt them with using several products at the same time, but some horses you actually can overload them by feeding too many immune boosting products at one time because their immune system isn't strong enough to handle it. So I keep a section on my Harmony Equine website that has products that I really like, that I know are going to give you sort of the most important parts of the immune system. One of the things that's really useful and inexpensive is vitamin C. They usually use 4 to 8 grams per day. That can be divided 4 grams twice a day or 2 grams twice a day, all the way up to about 8 grams. And that is really good for the connective tissue and for the immune system support. And if you want natural sources of vitamin C rather than the regular commercial vitamin C, I use an herb called camu, which you can find at health food stores. I use a lot of colostrum, which I get from BioStar, colostrum EQ, and that provides immunoglobulins, which are part of the immune system, directly into the gut, which is the part of the immune system they are trying to repair. What's very interesting about the colostrum is that a lot of horses get from it. Sometimes a little too much energy. So if you are using colostrum and they've recovered well and now they really seem to be almost too well recovered, that's one to back off on. Other horses can take colostrum daily for the rest of their lives if they really have a suppressed immune system. Most of the time, I'm going to be looking at treating these guys anywhere from some of them 6 months to a year before they're really back to their original level of performance. But they can be maintained. Next immune system herbs and products is one called noni, and it's also called Morinda citrifolia. And noni has a lot of fame as a juice that's supposed to cure everything. And it's amazing herb. In the juice form, for one thing, it's usually full of a lot of sugar, which is not always good for our types of horses or horses that tend to be heavy, but it also does not really concentrate the immune system properties and the anti-inflammatory properties. So I tend to use a concentrated fruit leather at 2 to 4 times the normal dose for a few weeks. Many times after the first 3 or 4 weeks, I'll just go back to what's on the package. It's another relatively inexpensive product that gives excellent results. There's also a topical version of it that you can actually put directly onto sore joints that works really quite well. The single herbs that can be used are cat's claw. I have not had as good a result with cat's claw in horses as people have had treating humans. Sometimes it's in the formulas, and I think it may be helpful there, but by itself, that has not been a really strong one. I use a lot of Siberian ginseng, but I usually use that in a balanced formula called APF, which is an anti-stress formula. And we'll talk about stress here in a minute. Another really great source of immune support, anti-inflammatory, and connective tissue support is the omega-3 fatty acids. And those can be in the form of whole flax. You can get them as a stabilized ground flax or as a flax oil. Oils have to be refrigerated in the summertime. Hemp oil is also good, hemp seeds, and chia seeds are very stable. And whole flax is very stable in the summertime in the barn. I usually use 4 ounces twice a day. It's very, very safe. You can use more than that. You can go up to 6 or 8 ounces twice a day if you want. And it really improves the immune system and has excellent anti-inflammatory effects. The medicinal mushrooms are also excellent immune system support. And the main immune-based medicinal mushrooms are cordyceps, reishi, maitake, shiitake, and turkey tail. And you can find a variety of different formulas. I use one from Curos, immune system support, and that's a mushroom-based formula. And the mushrooms, you can't say enough good about them. The research on them is tremendous for the immune system, their anti-inflammatory effects, and their connective tissue support. Tissue is where this bug likes to live. Joint supplements can be used and should be used if you have joint symptoms. Even once the horse is well recovered, there may have been some damage to the joint. And I think that it's a really good thing to do. And I'm not going to go into great detail on the joint supplements. You can change those around, usually every couple of years, rather than doing the same thing all the time. Some of the other things that we need to look at for immune system support and general treatment is magnesium citrate and topical magnesium. And there are now some topical magnesiums on the market for horses. Horses who cannot tolerate but a certain amount of magnesium fed orally. but they can tolerate the topical magnesium. And these are magnesium sprays. And those can be applied on the inside of the hind leg where there's not much hair. Be better absorbed or better tolerated, especially by horses that have sensitive guts. Curcumin or turmeric, I use the Curost brand, CUR-OST, because it's packaged in nice large quantities for horses. And it's very well absorbed, because not all turmeric is well absorbed, and you don't get all of the healing properties if you just feed straight turmeric. That turmeric is anti-inflammatory in almost every organ system that there is. And it's anti-inflammatory even in the central nervous system, in it's also supports the immune system. Tons of research on that. If you have access to hyperbaric oxygen therapies, there are a few of these around where you put the horse in a tank and they get sort of super oxygenated. That can be very effective. It's done by some veterinarians, and that is another avenue to explore if you have access to that in your particular area. Garlic can be useful to keep the bugs away. It's also good for the immune system and a good detoxifying cleansing agent for the liver, for the blood, from an herbal standpoint. Many horses, if they're going through the antibiotic treatment, you may need to add some marshmallow, slippery elm, meadowsweet are all good herbs. Slippery elm you really want to use from a company that you know harvests it ethically. It's actually an endangered herb in many parts of the world, and I tend to support companies that ethically. My favorite gut herb support is the Hilton Herbs Digest Support. They make some fabulous formulas, and we will be making a Lyme formula. The people that own Hilton Herbs and I are working on a Western herb type of formulas, hopefully later this year. Exercise should be done at the level the horse is comfortable. It's important to keep them moving. It's important to move their chi, to keep their energy going. Stimulation improves their attitude. However, you have to listen to your horse. And if you talk to anybody who has had Lyme, there are days you feel great and there are days you feel lousy. And on those days you feel lousy, it might be a halter, a lead shank, and a walk around the farm. Perfectly okay. And it's perfectly okay as the healing process goes on to have 4 or 5 good days and to have a couple of bad days. So don't get discouraged, but keep them moving and keep them exercising. And just listen to them. When they start feeling better, they will come along and work for you. Stress. This is the big thing that we have to spend a moment on. We want to, or at least learn what causes stress to this individual horse. Some horses are stressed if you change their pasture mate. Some horses aren't stressed until you've been on the road traveling and going to shows for weeks on end. They just take everything in stride. Some horses are stressed when one horse relapsed when they did construction in the barn because it upset his routine. Competition, traveling, it's not that you can't do it. It's that you then want to support the horse's immune system through it. So stress is confinement to not enough turnout, not enough friends, rough riding, hard clinics back to back, talked about earlier. So one of the things that I use a couple of things to manage stress. One is this product called APF Plus, a adaptogenic formula, and the adaptogenic herbs are designed to support the cortisol system. Well, when stress happens, the cortisol goes up. Cortisol suppresses the immune system, and that's why you get sepsis. So if I know I'm going to be doing something stressful, I put them on APF Plus for a few days ahead of time. I will use a homeopathic rescue. It's not really homeopathic, it's a Bach flower rescue remedy in their water while I'm traveling, making changes, moving them to a different farm. And I think that makes a huge difference. And just being aware of what might stress a particular horse. So to prevent it, support the immune system on a daily basis, reduce your vaccines to just what you need, or reduce stress as much as you can. And even if your horse has to have some antibiotics for another illness or an injury, use a lot of your probiotics. That wraps up this introduction to Lyme disease. And the key is to know that you really can get these horses better, and that there are a lot of tools in this alternative medicine toolbox. And really, in this 1-hour lecture, we've only been able to touch on the surface. We could talk for 2 or 3 hours just on all the different things you can do, but I'll be happy to help anybody would like it. We have on my website a Lyme article that contains a lot of this information written up in regular format. And we have a section on my website and anybody that would like a copy of the PDF, just shoot us an email, and we'll probably put it up in a Dropbox and give you all a link to it. And then you can download it on your own whenever you want. We'll leave that link up for probably about a week. So thank you for attending, and look for some more webinars from us.